You've prayed the same prayer for 3 nights in a row, gripping your blanket like it might finally start working if you just try a little harder. You read another chapter, hoping this time something will feel different. You promise yourself, again, that tomorrow you will be more disciplined, more consistent, more spiritual. But by evening, you feel the same tired ache sitting underneath all that effort. It is like flipping a lamp switch again and again in a dark room, wondering why the bulb refuses to shine. You thought the problem was your willpower. You thought you were failing because you were not trying hard enough. But what if the real problem was never a lack of effort? What if you have been trying to force something that was only ever meant to grow? Jesus did not tell his followers to manufacture fruit through sheer determination. He told them to abide. By the end of this video, you will understand the difference between striving and abiding, and you will have a simple way to return to Christ instead of forcing spiritual growth that never seems to last. Picture two believers facing the exact same pressure. On the outside, their lives look almost identical. Both wake up early to read their Bible, both serve at church, both try to guard their words, both fight the same familiar temptations. But on the inside, something is very different. One is white-knuckling his way through each day, checking his progress like a scoreboard, afraid one bad day will undo all his effort. He reads scripture like a manual to fix himself, then closes it and braces alone for the next battle. The other believer faces the exact same temptations, the exact same tired mornings, the exact same failures. But instead of gripping tighter, she keeps turning back to Christ in the middle of the mess. She does not have an easier life, she simply receives strength from a different source. One is straining to produce something on his own. The other is staying connected to the one who produces it in her. That is the entire difference John 15 is pointing us toward. The first thing to see is this. Trying harder can quietly become a way of disconnecting from Christ, even while using Christian language the whole time. Picture a believer at her desk, calendar full, journal full of goals to be more faithful this year. She is not lazy, she is exhausted from carrying a weight Jesus never asked her to carry alone. Jesus said, "I am the vine, you are the branches." He did not say, "I am the coach, and you are the athlete who must perform." A branch does not clench itself straining to grow. A branch simply stays attached, and life flows through it on its own. When effort quietly replaces abiding, faith turns into a performance you feel one mistake away from failing. Effort itself is not the enemy here. Effort disconnected from Christ is. Here is a phrase worth remembering in that exact moment, when the striving starts to rise. Lord, I return to you right now. Not, I will try harder, but, Lord, I return to you right now. That one sentence quietly turns your attention off your performance and back onto His presence. The second thing to see is even simpler, and it changes almost everything. Fruit is not forced. Fruit grows from connection. No branch on earth has ever strained itself into producing fruit. Fruit is the natural overflow of staying joined to the vine. Nothing more complicated than that. This is not a passive picture, though. The branch still has to remain, to stay attached, to keep receiving what the vine supplies. But remaining is very different from forcing. Remaining says, I depend on you for this. Forcing says, I will produce this myself, and I will use your name while I do it. Say that line back to yourself the next time you feel the pressure to perform for God. Fruit is not forced. Fruit grows from connection. If this is already naming something you have been carrying, drop this anchor in the comments. Lord, teach me to abide, not strive. Now stay with me because the next part is where many Christians miss the turn completely. Here is the truth many exhausted Christians are afraid to admit out loud. The goal was never to try harder. The goal is to return faster. You may notice the strain showing up in small, familiar ways. Drained before the day even begins. Anxious when nothing is obviously wrong. Empty after doing all the right religious things. Restless, like you are running and running but never actually arriving anywhere. This is not a sign that you love God less than other believers. It is often a quiet sign that effort has replaced connection without you noticing. The third thing to understand is what abiding actually looks like on an ordinary day. Jesus spoke these words to his disciples on the night before his arrest, hours before the cross. He was not handing them a productivity plan for spiritual growth. He was preparing frightened men for the most disorienting night of their lives. He wanted them to know that when everything fell apart, their life would not come from their own strength. It would come from staying joined to Him, even in the dark. That is why abiding can not only mean a quiet morning devotion before the day begins. It has to mean returning to Christ inside an ordinary Tuesday. Picture a mother in the kitchen, dishes piling up, a short prayer under her breath before she answers her child again. Picture a man sitting in his car before a hard meeting, quietly saying, "Lord, I need you in the next hour." Abiding is not one dramatic moment you build your whole faith around. It is many small returns across one ordinary day. The fourth thing to see is that discipline itself is not the problem here. Reading scripture, praying, serving others, these are good and necessary practices. But discipline becomes life-giving only when it flows from relationship, not when it quietly replaces it. Picture two mornings that look almost identical from the outside. In one, a believer opens his Bible like checking a box, eyes scanning words, mind already on the day ahead. In the other, a believer opens the same Bible slowly, aware she is not just reading information, she is sitting with a person. The difference is not the number of verses read that morning. The difference is whether the discipline is feeding connection or quietly replacing it. Discipline is the branch staying in place. Connection is the sap that actually makes it alive. The fifth and final thing to remember is the simplest and often the hardest to actually live. The goal is not to try harder. The goal is to return faster. Think again of that lamp, switched on and off in a dark room, no matter how many times you flip it. The bulb was never the real problem. The plug was never in the wall. The moment it is finally connected to power, it does not strain or force itself to shine. It simply shines because it is joined to the source. That is what abiding does for you, quietly and steadily. Here is a simple way to carry this forward starting today. Notice the strain. When you feel yourself gripping tighter, pause and notice it, instead of pushing through on autopilot. Return to Christ. Say it plainly, even in one short sentence. Lord, I return to you right now. Rest in His strength. Let your next action, whether it is a conversation, a task, or a prayer, come from that connection instead of pressure. Notice, return, rest. You can practice this at your desk, in your car, at the kitchen sink, or lying awake at night. This is not instant change, and it is not a magic phrase that fixes everything at once. It is a faithful way back to the vine, one small return at a time. If this message spoke to your heart, do not just close this video and go back to the same tired pattern. Write this in the comments. Lord, teach me to abide, not strive. That is not a phrase that earns you anything from God. It is simply a marker of the direction you are choosing today. You do not have to force what was only ever meant to grow. You do not have to prove your way back to God. You only have to return. Stay close to the vine and let Him do what only He can do through you. If this gave you a clearer starting point, subscribe for more biblical wisdom, mind renewal, and practical Christian growth.